Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, fellow Africans from a rather cold and chilly Johannesburg here today. My name is Fifi Peters, and this morning we are gathered here to discuss infrastructure and the manner in which investments in the sector can, of course, boost growth on the African continent. And very often when we talk about infrastructure, we speak about it in a very abstract manner. We talk about the highways and the roads and the bridges and the financing models that will be required to make it work. But in my view, at the basics, when we are talking about infrastructure, it's the bread and butter issues that essentially shape our daily lives and also determine whether our businesses succeed or fail. So it is the proper road or the working rail line from Limpopo or Ekurhuleni that ensures that a business can get their goods to their customers in the province, in the region, as well as beyond. It is the constant power that not only keeps the factory running efficiently, but also allows us to charge our phones, to watch TV like CNBC Africa, as well as also run businesses from home. It's the taps and the water that ensures that we have something to drink, that we're able to take our baths, as well as making a mine and a manufacturing facility operate efficiently from their various jurisdictions. It's the classrooms, it's the clinics, and in this digital age, it's also ensuring that we do have fast and affordable access to the internet for learners to learn in the classrooms and for us to stay connected to the rest of the world through artificial intelligence and all other innovations. So all this and more boils down to infrastructure at its basics. So investing in this area is not necessarily just investing in economic growth. It's investing in basic dignity. It's not simply economies thriving, but it is merely surviving. So this morning we are here to discuss how to unlock further investments in this space to ensure that this much needed capital is able to reach those that need them the most. Before we do get to the discussion going, I would like to let you know that you're able to join the conversation with us. The following hashtags: Invest Gauteng, hashtag AFCFTA, hashtag GGDA, hashtag Africa Dialogue, hashtag NEPAT, hashtag Infrastructure for Growth, hashtag Build Africa 2030. You can join in on the conversation on those various platforms. Here is also a brief scene setter to get us going this morning.
The African continent is home to 1.54 billion people and continues to grow at a rapid rate, and it requires its infrastructure to grow at a similar rate. As it stands, infrastructure development in the continent has a lot of room for improvement. For example, in 2022, only 31% of sub-Saharan Africa's rural dwellers had access to electricity, while 48% of the population in sub-Saharan Africa had access to safe water. Infrastructure development in the continent requires an estimated 150 billion rand annually. This infrastructure gap is inhibiting growth in the economy, with estimates suggesting that it costs Africa around 2 to 3% of GDP growth per year. Investments in transportation, health, energy, water, and telecommunications are said to be priority infrastructure. From the Inga Dams in the Democratic Republic of Congo, the Mandela Bridge in South Africa, to the Nairobi-Mombasa Highway in Kenya, infrastructure projects are transforming the lives of citizens as well as the continent's facade. But more needs to be done to meet the growing demand of Africa's population.
Beginning with Ambassador Xolisa Mabongo, DDG for Global Governance, the G20 SOS Sherpa, as well as BRICS Sherpa. We also have seated right next to me Mr. Amin Idrissa Doum, Director of Economy, Infrastructure, Trade and Industrialization at AUDA NEPAD. Good morning, sir. Good morning. Mr. Saki Zangaka, Acting Group CEO of the Gauteng Growth and Development Agency and a fellow friend. Hello, hello. And last but not least, Mr. Teddy Dakar, CEO at Zutari. Teddy, good to see you again.
Always a pleasure. Good morning.
And so let's get to discussing. I mean, How would you assess the current lay of the land, and where are the areas of further opportunity as we talk from a continental perspective?
Thank you very much. It's well known that when we speak about infrastructure, we always think in terms of gap. But it's important maybe to map out where the gaps actually are. First, at the national level, we know exactly, precisely for each of our countries what's missing in terms of roads, highways, in terms of power generation, but also in terms of transmission lines, actually, and distribution system. Obviously, you have as well the social infrastructures, hospitals, schools, and urban infrastructures as well. We don't talk much about them, but majority of Africans, we are now moving to cities. In 1955, there are about 700 towns in Africa. Today, we have more than 6,700 towns within a time frame of 60 years. So you can imagine our population is moving, but then our cities are not, our towns are not actually really following the trend in terms of development of urban infrastructure. You speak just about the water. Ambassador Kolisi have to be away because he has to join us online because he has to fix the question of the water access in Gauteng region. And that's the case actually everywhere. Now, speaking about gaps is one thing, but we need as well to speak about the opportunities, and this is extremely important. For that one, I do work for a continental organization, so I always have, I won't necessarily say a helicopter view, but I have at least the privilege to look at actually the matter from the continental perspective. We do strongly think that it's important that we come actually with what we call continental framework, continental policy. You can't actually really move an infrastructure if you don't have the proper policy. That's important. So at the continental level, we have, for instance, for infrastructures, what we call the Program for Infrastructure Development in Africa. This is one. This Program for Infrastructure Development for Africa is mostly for what we call regional transborder infrastructures. And this is pretty much linked to the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. We had the first generation 2010, 2020. Now we are in the second generation. The first generation, it was quite good. It was more than 400 projects, but then we realized when we were assessing the first generation of PIDA that we have to be more focused. Then we come now with the second generation, which is pretty much actually focused, 69 projects only, but with the cost of $169 billion. Then we do have as well for access to electricity, what we call the Continental Power System Master Plan. Here also, this is extremely important because we know there are 600 million Africans who lack access to electricity. Our total power generation capacity, if you put all of them together, South Africa to Egypt, from Somalia to Senegal, we put all of us together, we generate less than 250 gigawatts of electricity, But then we need, between now and 2040, to move fivefold. We need to multiply the power generation capacity by 5, moving to 1,200, actually, at least, gigawatt of power generation capacity. That requires investment. But then there is a mechanism to do that. We need also transmission lines. We don't have enough transmission lines, and then we need distribution system. And then there is also the water. But I think that I will pause here so to allow us for the people to speak. But I will come actually later on to explain what are the challenges that we are actually facing really to move, to implement them on the ground. And at the same time, what we are doing specifically to implement stuff on the ground and why we are succeeding in what we are doing. Because the truth of the matter is, we speak a lot about gaps and challenges, but there are many successful things that are happening, not at the speed that we want to see, but at least they are happening. And we must double down to accelerate. Okay. So we pause here.
Okay, thank you. So we'll come back to you then just to talk about, practicality on the ground. Saki, I think you can also relate to what Mr. Amin was talking about in terms of rapid urbanization and people flocking to the cities and requiring the infrastructure in these cities that were not built to accommodate the amount of people. But I suppose also you can just give us the take of what's happening in Gauteng right now. What is the latest? Are you seeing improvements? What kind of traction are you seeing?
No, thank you, Fifi, and good morning to everyone. Actually, I was talking to a friend this morning, and I said one of the key things about those responsible for leading an economy is creating confidence about the future. And what does that mean, and how does it happen? If you want to buy a house today, you got to think about the future. Will you get value out of the house when you sell it? Is it going to be more expensive or cheaper in the future? Is the area safe or going to be safe? So basically, transparency, action, and what you do is what eventually makes people make the right decisions today. And what we then decided to do as a province is to bring everyone together. In South Africa, we have different layers of government. There's national, provincial, and municipality. And there's many things needed for infrastructure to happen that happen at a municipal level or national level. So let's say ESCOM, it's a national entity. Approvals on site development plans, it's a municipality. Traffic lights that don't work or potholes, it's a municipality. And we said, well, we can't put our hands back and say, well, it's not our responsibility. So we've decided to convene everyone and say what it is that they're doing. So Infrastructure SA announced 7 projects in the country that are strategic that they will fund. 2 of them are in Gauteng. And one of them is revitalization of the CBD, Johannesburg Central Business District. And the other one is a water treatment plant, Ekurhuleni. We had an investment conference in April. There were 60 projects confirmed there that would be invested in the next 36 months. So we've put them in buckets of 12 months, 12 months, 12 months, what is starting now. And we're tracking them to see how they're going to be implemented. Those amount to about 312 billion rands. But again, there, what we've done on the things that Infrastructure SA is raising, we meet with the developers. We met one last week, it's a listed company, well, about 2 weeks ago, listed company, and they say, we need this approval, we need that approval. We don't yet need bulk, but we can invest this money, but these are the things we need for that to happen. So that's the spirit that we're doing, where we are lifting what are the projects that are being done, bringing a bit of transparency so that everyone can see what the pipeline is. Transnet is putting money on this, ESCOM is putting money on this, PRASA is putting money on this, and on the back of that, you can now decide, okay, I can now, send more cars to Richards Bay or Gqeberha because there's now investment in infrastructure. So that's the approach we're doing, and in part of the conversations I was saying, one of the things I see, we put a lot of economic modeling into our stats, which contributes into the credibility challenges, because we say 10 billion is going to be invested, and as a result of that, 1,000 jobs should be created. But sometimes these are data centers which are operated by 50 people. So you have billions of investments put into it, but the model gives you something else. And people keep saying, what? But you're saying we're spending money, we're not seeing the impact on jobs. Yes, because the investments are not as job absorbing, but they are important to drive maybe logistics in the economy and many other things. So that's really the platform we're using as the province in bringing everybody together to have a sit-through on what investments we're making so that they can plan on them, and then we keep monitoring the progress and implementation.
I am glad that you also mentioned the matter around the money that we hear is being set aside for these major investments, and the fact that we're not seeing impact and real change on the ground. So I'll even take it a step back. You mentioned the Gauteng Investment Conference. I think we started with major investment conferences in this country in 2018. It was a wonderful thing that was ushered by current president, who then came into the role at that time, investment conferences and just getting the private sector to work more closely with government. We've had a couple since then. We've even had targets raised since then. We have had a lot of stumbling blocks, I know, along the way. But what we haven't seen is all those millions and billions that were announced in these investment conferences translates into meaningful growth for this economy, if I just talk about South Africa specifically. And we all saw the latest growth numbers that were released by Statistics South Africa earlier this week. I mean, the bright side, economists had actually expected the economy to shrink. But I don't know if we should be happy at the fact that the economy grew by 0.1%. So it's that disconnect between the money and why the impact is not being spread as meaningfully on the ground, which maybe you can weigh in here. Teddy, just your participation as a private sector voice in the infrastructure space. How do we capitalize on this opportunity better?
I think there is a lot of money that is going into investment for infrastructure. I don't hold the view that there's a big gap. I hold a different view. If you look at South Africa, for example, and I'm not talking about the 1 trillion rands over the next 3 years. I'm talking about current expenditures, about between 300 billion to 350 billion on infrastructure every year. The question is, where is that money going? Where is the infrastructure? Because that's a lot of money that's being spent. The issue is the leakages in the system that we have, where you put aside 1 billion rands for a stadium, but you only get 100 million rands or something smaller. So funding is there, but how we're using funding is the biggest problem. The other problem that we have, and I can only speak from the supply side, not from the demand side, is we don't have sufficient people to build the infrastructure that we would like to build in the country. I'll give you some numbers. If you look at European countries, it's about 1 engineer versus 200 people. That's the ratio. You go to China, it's about 1 to 310. You go to India, about 1 to 900. You come to South Africa, it's 1 to 3,100. 1 to 3,100. That's the ratio. 1 engineer to 3,100 people versus 1 engineer to 200 people. And we don't produce enough engineers. 32% of our universities on the continent have some form of engineering degree. It's not sufficient. Africa needs roughly about 2.4 million engineers. We're way nowhere near that. If you look at back on the South African side, take the municipalities. They've been depleted of engineers and people are leaving the industry. The reason they're leaving the industry is a lot of factors. One of them is attractive to go outside. We haven't built dams, for example, in the past 25 years. Since 1994, 30 years, we built 2 dams. Between 1964 and 1994, we built 18 dams. I'm talking 200 million cubic meters of water. So we don't have dam engineers anymore. So if you want to build a dam today, we don't have those engineers. So to make South Africa a construction site, we need to bring back those engineers that we don't have at the moment. And for me, that's the biggest bottleneck. That explains why, as you heard from Investment South Africa, these projects don't come to fruition because of project prep. The reason is the engineers are not there. The engineers are the people who do the preparatory work. They're the ones who do the feasibility studies. They're the ones who do the master planning, the designing, the construction supervision, and we have a dearth of them. So that's where the big problem is, not just more about the money.
I think that's an interesting take. Quite often we think that it's the money that will solve the solution, the problem. And so essentially what you're saying is that if the 1.6 trillion that we told is required is put on the table right now, it won't necessarily solve the solution. It solve the problem if we don't solve for the other things. And I'm wondering, so if you can identify with some of the challenges that he was talking about in terms of why some of the projects that you see with your helicopter view are not being implemented on the ground. Is it the fact that money is being leaked in the system? Is it the fact that there's not enough technical know-how on the ground to bring the projects to the finish line? Or is it more?
What he's saying actually have been clearly identified, not in South Africa actually, but in most of our countries. In fact, 9 out of 10 infrastructure projects in Africa fail at the, what we call the preparatory phase. And one of the reasons, of course, is the lack of capacity, obviously, but also most of the time, the truth of the matter, let me take an example. When you want to build a road, it's not just about the capacity to design the road. You need as well really to understand where the road actually is going, what is it going to impact, to which extent that's going to touch actually the economy, how is it going to connect people. But then that means you need to understand exactly even your environment. But the truth of the matter is that most of our African governments don't know our countries. And that costs a lot of money. When you say that, you have the impression that, oh, how can the government don't know people? Just one statistic, an easy one. South Africa being put aside, and Egypt, I think maybe Algeria, Morocco, countries from the North Africa, what we call the Middle Africa in general, more than 70% of our citizens are not registered and recognized by their governments because they don't have ID. They don't have birth certificates. So, because government lack capacity on the ground. So those are, when you start talking about infrastructure, I think you need to factor in all those actually problems. Now, yes, money is there. When we announce actually 100 billion investments, let's say, accessing to the money is much less difficult than actually utilizing the money. And utilizing the money for infrastructure means really start preparing properly the projects on the ground. And that's the reason why at Oda NEPAD we come with two solutions, technical solutions for our countries. The first one, we have a unit that we call service delivery mechanism, in which actually we put engineers together. And when we don't have engineers, we buy, because capacity can be bought. Unfortunately, we have to buy engineers from outside Africa most of the time because we don't have enough, and that's the truth. And then we avail them to our countries so that we can kick off not even the project preparation phase, but what we call the early project preparation phase, which is about setting the environment, cleaning the environment, so that the project preparation phase can actually start. That's number one. And then we have come as well with an instrument we call PIDA quality level. PIDA is a program for infrastructure development in Africa. And when you want actually to finance your infrastructure stuff, you need to prove that it's quite good, it's solid, it's well prepared. So you need to put quality in the preparation itself, the preparatory phase. So we have created actually this instrument that we avail to our member state, which is a certification actually instrument for our countries to use. So that by doing so, you really start figuring out how we are going to access to the money and how we are going to spend the money. So at the end of the day, at the end of the journey, what you have built as an infrastructure, being a piece of road or power generation, or even a school, or even a data center, is well built, well designed, well constructed, and it will have a real impact on the economy. So those are the challenges that we are facing, in fact. But again, I'm quite optimistic, and I'm Afro-optimistic. So that's why I think that while we do have the challenges, we also have the solutions. Now, for us, is really make the solution. Now, just one last point, which is, sure, we don't talk much actually about one big problem we have in Africa, and I refer actually to the question about our governments not knowing our people. Governments don't know our people because our governments are understaffed. We have always the impression that governments are overstaffed. In some countries, it might be true, but just give you the number. If you go to France, you have about 80 civil servants for 1,000 population, right? Even in the US, contrary to the general idea that the US government is small, is big. Actually, you have the federal government, the state government, the county government. If you put all of them together, you have about 114 civil servants for 1,000 population in the US. Japan is about 60. In Africa, the average number is 4 civil servants for 1,000 population. South Africa is maybe the best because it's about 50 for 1,000. Egypt is about 50 for 1,000. Take out the 2, you go back to 4 in average. In some countries like Mali is even 1 for 1,000 population. How can you actually really address the development of your country if your civil service is understaffed like that?
Sure. You know, often we talk about a number of joblessness, but you guys have just been talking about how many jobs are there for the taking in the public sector amongst engineers, which we'll get to a little bit more. This is fantastic. I would like to invite the ambassador right now. We finally do have ambassador on the connection with us. So apologies, it has taken so long to get to you. So essentially, I assume that you've been following quite a bit of the conversation, but even if you haven't, what I would like from you is just to maybe unpack the opportunity that hosting the G20, and also the BRICS potentially bring for some of the goals and ambitions that we do have as a continent to boost infrastructure investment?
Thank you. Let me start by highlighting some of the priorities that South Africa has placed on the table that are relevant to the discussion this morning. The first one is the issue of indebtedness. So we have, amongst the four overarching priorities for our presidency is to deal with debt sustainability. In 2024, African countries paid close to $80 billion just in servicing their debt. We have a number of our countries in the continent that are paying more in debt servicing than they spend on education and health. And of course, this is not sustainable for any society or people. We need to do more investments in areas such as health and education in order for our countries to have a long-term prospect of growth, especially in a context where we have in Africa what is called a youth bulge. I think some of the speakers who spoke before me did refer to some of these, the position of the young people in the continent. But the other area that we have placed on the agenda for the G20 this year is the issue of the cost of capital, which is also linked to the issue of debt sustainability. So African countries do not borrow more, for example, than European countries. But in Africa, we have got what is called by the UNDP an African premium, which means, therefore, our countries, even though they are not borrowing more than European countries, but we borrow at a very high cost. So hence, people are talking about this African premium. And we have also placed this on the agenda. We hope that by the time we host the summit of the G20 in November, there will be a report and some decisions taken by G20 countries collectively on the issue of the cost of capital. I'm raising these two issues because they are directly relevant. If we are talking about investment in infrastructure, but our countries are spending more resources servicing debt, then there is a contradiction there. Let me stop here for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador, for those salient points. I mean, of course, so when we are talking in this space, we're not talking about small money, and the cost of that money is a crucial element in deciding how to allocate capital. You look like you've got something on your lips, sir.
Not quite. As I said earlier, I think there are opportunities on the continent. There's no doubt in my mind that what infrastructure can do. The state's R1 billion in infrastructure should create about 7,000 jobs. So the more we invest in infrastructure, the more jobs we create. One of the problems we have is that the way we approach infrastructure is not inclusive. It does not translate into uplifting our people from poverty into prosperity, because some of the projects we go for, you have seen across the continent, we have a lot of white elephants. The more we invest in white elephants, the less we uplift our people and the more our societies become unequal. And so we need to think about where we invest and where we put the money so we can create those jobs.
I guess the white elephant speaks to the point that you were making earlier about the leakages in the system. And put it to you in terms of a framework that can minimize the leakages. I mean, we heard about a governance framework that is being invested in, and we hear our leaders speak about governance always in terms of how they're approaching the running of their administrations going forward. And of course, one thing that's always reminded to me is that, you know, when you do talk about leakages and when you talk about nefarious behavior, it's two sides of a coin. And while yes, there's the public sector that is responsible for a framework to ensure that everything happens smoothly, there's also another transect on the other side, being the private sector. So in your view, and based on what you have seen, how do we fix the governance framework to minimize the leakages and white elephants?
To tango.
100%.
The private sector is corrupt.
Well, you can tango by yourself, but it becomes a different dance.
There's the corruptor and the corruptee in our law. So the private sector has also behaved badly. We saw in South Africa around about 2010 in the construction companies where they colluded. That's not good for business. But by and large, I've seen countries that have turned corruption away and tried to improve their governments. Take Saudi Arabia, for instance. They're investing about 21 trillion rands in projects as we speak, committed with funding. And by the way, that's creating also the shortage of engineers on the continent because people are leaving to go to that. How did they get to transform their country to do that? They dealt with the issue of corruption dead on. You may recall at some point that the prince had to get all the people that he suspected and lock them up in a hotel to confirm where's the money, where is it, bring it back. So if we don't take that kind of action, it's extremely difficult. As long as there's no transparency in government, there's no governance in procurement that our government put in place, corruption is going to continue.
Okay.
Transparency in governance is very important.
It is, and I don't disagree with you in the room. Saki, maybe just to bring it back to you and also to bring it back to the G20 opportunity, what can you tell us about what potentially this could mean for the host province of Gauteng and for businesses perhaps who are looking to see where they can partner in raising this percentage of PPPs presently at 2%?
No, thanks. Well, firstly, on G20, there's a lot that we stand to benefit on as a country. One, we have presidents now, so we kind of influence the agenda, contributing in highlighting what's important for South Africa and important for the continent. Two, it's going to be good for tourism because generally goods follow people. People are going to come here. They see that South Africa is actually a very lovely country, warm people, infrastructure that generally works with whatever the challenges are. So tourism is going to benefit out of it. And with it, we saw it post-World Cup, that there's sustained tourism and a bit of increase in investments. I agree with Teddy, skills are an issue in the economy in many sectors. But I think the bigger problem is the decision-making. Sometimes we allow, so let's say in investments on bulk infrastructure, there's a lot of money that's been put on what the town planners call urban sprawl. So you go in the middle of nowhere, these are farms, you put estates at a very big cost to the fiscus when you have, for example, a centine that doesn't work. There's no maintenance put in infrastructure. So I think sometimes where we direct the infrastructure money also gets to be a problem. As you said about Saudi Arabia, Dubai did the same thing. They bought the skills they didn't have. So I think finding the skills is, for me, the least of the problems is, do you have the money? Do you have the right projects? And are you investing in the things that are going to grow your economy? And that's what we're trying to do, where we say, okay, if a municipality has the money, are they spending it? If they're not spending it, what's the problem? If they don't have engineering capacity, can we help them get that engineering capacity? So that's really what we're trying to address as a province, as an approach, that these problems sometimes seem general, but they're actually not that complicated. They're very specific. You just happen to have a municipality that doesn't have an engineer and put an engineer there. Or if you can't, get a company that's employed to perform that engineering work. So those are problems that are manageable beyond the ones that are big. I think we have bigger challenges in the country and many others, but others is just a person who's supposed to take a paper from here to there, and they just have not done it.
Ambassador Mabongo, sir, just maybe one last question to the ambassador before we open it up to the floor, and just hear any inputs, any questions that you guys might have for the speakers, so that can advance the discussion further. What was mentioned is the importance of making sure the infrastructure that we're talking about trying to increase investments in is a lot more inclusive. So presently the argument has been made that there are a lot of people that are being left behind in the value chain, most notably the social stakeholders, the community. Maybe you can just give us insights into discussions that you're having with your colleagues in preparing for the G20, and also your colleagues over at BRICS, about how to ensure some of the efforts that we are trying to make to improve the economy and the continent are more inclusive for all stakeholders.
Thank you very much for the question. Firstly, in terms of the G20, in our calendar of meetings, we've got about 132. At this stage, close to 60 of those meetings have been held. And therefore, we're looking into the period up to November for the rest of the meetings. And you may have noticed as well that these meetings are spread all over the country. They are held in different provinces. For example, the Sherpas of the G20 will be meeting at the end of this month in Sun City in the Northwest. Other meetings have been held around Johannesburg, in Gqeberha, KZN. So I think from the tourism perspective, as one of the speakers was saying, I think this is good for South Africa. I personally took part in one of the meetings of the development working group of the G20. It was held in Cape Town. And the department that was organizing that meeting basically took all the delegates for a half-day tour of Robben Island. And that was very impactful. And I think when we talk about people returning to the country, you can see that if you came alone as a delegate, you are likely to come back to South Africa with your family and also promote it with your friends as well. So that is the one area. The second area is that during our G20, we will have a summit that we call the Social Summit. So that will be aimed basically at bringing civil society broadly into the conversations that we are having in the G20. But the priorities that South Africa set for the G20 presidency have been welcomed by the majority of the members of the G20. So we're looking forward to a process that will be successful as we go to the summit in November. But perhaps I think one of the other issues I would mention from a continental perspective is the issue of intra-African trade that has not been growing. And I think this is a testament to the fact that we have underinvested over the decades on infrastructure. Hence, meetings like these ones today are important. If you look at intra-African trade, it ranges at around 15%, and it has been like that for decades now, for 2-3 decades. It's not really moving. When you compare to Europe, where intra-European trade is close to 80%, and of course in Asia, intra-Asian trade ranges at about 55%. So this is a sort of an indictment on us, because without infrastructure, this intra-African trade cannot improve. And of course, there are other challenges, such as the fact that a number of countries tend to produce the same products. So I thought I must just highlight the importance of infrastructure from the perspective of promoting a trade between our countries. Thank you.
Mr. Amin does want to pick up on the infrastructure and intra-Africa trade and why we're not moving the dial, in your view.
I don't think that it's just a question of the lack or the insufficient physical infrastructures. The intra-African trade does not move because there are also what I call mental infrastructures. Take South Africa is the biggest Africa industrialized country. But look at the amount of exports from South Africa, not only actually industrial, but also for agriculture, from South Africa to the rest of Africa. It's quite small. And during the last Trump tariff, I hear a lot of actually conversation talking about the fact that Trump tariff may impact negatively South Africa because South Africans would export actually less to the US. And people were complaining, and not many people actually were thinking, wait a minute, why don't we think about Senegal, for instance? If you want to export foodstuff from South Africa, why thinking systematically about the US or about actually Europe and not thinking about Senegal, about Nigeria, about Chad, about Sudan, about Cameroon? That's what I call actually mental infrastructures. Our mental infrastructures in Africa are being or have been actually designed in a way that we always think when it comes to our own trade to export to Europe, to the US, or to Asia. So always about externalities. That's number one. And that's actually bad. Take Lesotho. People are saying that, well, Lesotho actually, the biggest export of Lesotho is apparels and clothing, right? Sending them to the US. That represents about 60% of Lesotho GDP. So they were actually organized in a way that they only export to the US utilizing AGOA. Now we have the ACFTA, which could actually be much more beneficial than, more interesting than even the AGOA. But nothing actually in the Lesotho textile industry have been designed to export to West Africa. It has been actually designed to only export to the US, and they did so. Even if there was ACFTA, I'm pretty sure that people will still think about exporting to outside, because we still keep carrying the mantle, obviously the colonial mentality ourselves, actually.
This is a fascinating, area of investment in infrastructure, and I think that one that many of us didn't really know about when we came here this morning, the importance of mental infrastructure. I mean, we've heard about physical infrastructure, and we also heard about the social infrastructure with human development and skills. And it's not a joke; it's out-the-box thinking. And so, bringing it to you, Saki, just given the fact that the GGDA, you do quite a lot of advocacy work in positioning Gauteng as the gateway to the rest of the continent. And how are you looking at the current environment right now, externally and within, the talks and the threats, and even sometimes the actual tariffs themselves, in making it a lot more difficult to perhaps crowd in investments and investments to the scale of infrastructure, or perhaps in bringing an opportunity for the continent to think differently about where the grass used to be greener and start watering the grass right here on African soil and potentially making it greener. What's happening there on your front?
Yeah. So, Fifi, again, where I started, confidence about the future and what builds that confidence. So the reality is, if you take South Africa and a few of the industrialized economies in the world, their physical infrastructure has been geared towards the West. That's financial services, that's logistics, that's everything else. So Lesotho, it's easy for them to export to the US through South Africa, but sometimes to get to the rest of the continent, it's expensive, because we've not built that physical infrastructure for things to get there through rail, through seaports, and sometimes where it's airports. I mean, I flew to Morocco and I had to go through Paris to get to Morocco. So that's the reality of what you get, and it makes it expensive in the continent. Until you deal with those, like in the AFCTA, part of the conversations is about standards. South African, let's say SABS standards, a lot of them mirror Europe and the US, but in the continent, many countries have different standards. So if you're dealing with 50 countries in the continent, you got to now apply to 50 different people to get your products into it, to get them approved for them to be in the shelves. So I think sometimes where it looks like Africans naturally don't want to cooperate, it's not that. It's because the infrastructure has not been there. So we've got to deal with that. If you deal with West Africa and some of the regions which have now adopted a common currency, it's underlined by the euro. So in essence, you're now converting from rand to euro to another currency. So the payment systems as well make certain things expensive. You look at South African products, when you go to the rest of the continent, there's a bit of a premium to them, to what you would pay when you're at home, because you've had to compensate for that physical infrastructure that's not there. I mean, I saw stats, which is actually very positive for me, that in the next 10 years, you're likely to have 400 million Africans in the middle class. And I think if we build our own local capability to produce, build our own infrastructure, you will have a lot of the stuff actually produced locally in the countries without them having to be exported or imported from elsewhere. And I think those are the opportunities that we have, that, yeah, in the short term, certain things look like a negative, but if we build our own self-reliance, it then minimizes and does import substitution on what we can do. But I come back to, when there's a problem, let's identify what the problem is and fix it. So I think a lot of the conversations tend to be general and we average things out. And on average, it may sound correct, but sometimes in a certain thing, you just need to fix a border post to reduce the time people take to get between South Africa and Zim and South Africa and Mozambique. It's not that deep. Just sort the pot out and things will move.
Heard you loud and clear. And I mean, to the point that you both were making, I was interested to learn when the initial tariffs were laid on the world on the 2nd of April, that Ivory Coast, also another suspect, that exports practically all their cashews to Vietnam, and then Vietnam exports all the cashews that we eat to us and the rest of the world into the US. And there was a whole lot of concerns about what that value chain looked like. But I think, just speaking to what you guys have said, the fact that our infrastructure has been structured right now to not necessarily cater for our needs, but to tap into these external markets that we once viewed as heaven, in quote, or the green pasture. So Teddy, I put it to you, in the event that we have the engineers, we either raise these engineers, or we bring back the existing engineers who left the country, or we buy some engineers to come through to the country. In the event that we have systems that ensure that unnecessary money is not lost in the system, is there a will amongst the business community to change our infrastructure makeup right now, such that it's geared more towards manufacturing locally for local needs or continental needs, and also for external markets? We can't leave them behind. But is there a business will to increase the resiliency, I suppose, of the country and the continent?
Absolutely. That's not the problem. There is no business person who would avoid a market that is on your doorstep and try and chase something that is too far at a higher cost. It defeats the whole logic of being in business. I'm a bit of a frustrated person as a businessman watching what's going on my own continent. Let's take what Saki was just talking about in fixing things. Between Durban and Kinshasa, the DRC, we have a railway line cutting through Zimbabwe, Zambia, going up there. Check how many operators are there, and check the interoperability of these railway operators. It's not there. And so it slows down the progress of goods. And this is information that is already available. We have SADC, but we're not doing it, which is the mental infrastructure. Take another one I'll give you. We have something called the Southern African Power Pool, okay? Managing energy production and distribution within the SADC region. There's absolutely no reason why South Africa should have load shedding when Angola has 1.3 to 1.4 gigawatts of excess energy, and all it takes is 600 kilometers of transmission line to connect. Okay? So the answers are there, but there's some form of inertia, probably as a result of the mental infrastructure that is not that strong to get these things going. So yes, absolutely, business would do that. There's no reason why we wouldn't invest in those areas. But then government needs to move. The SADC, it needs to move to make these things happen. There's no reason why, for instance, at the moment, if you see what's happening, because of the congestion in Durban, Botswana is trying to build lines to go through Namibia on to Angola side. Zambia is also trying to go through Mozambique. Why? Because the infrastructure going to Durban is not functioning the way it should be functioning. So we are creating our own problems. We've got more goods on the road. Maybe you're not aware of this. Most of these trucks, as they come in the country, they're escorted. That's another cost. Escorted by security. They go in convoys with security, armed security, to protect the goods that are going down. That's very difficult for business, and that's why Saki says it's very expensive to export within the continent. The costs are just high, which becomes much easier for you to just push the product out of the continent.
Ambassador Mbongo, so maybe you can defend your colleagues or maybe help us understand the view of your colleagues in government, because we're hearing here in the room and on stage of an inertia. We're also hearing of a perhaps an archaic way of thinking and approaching problems. And the reason why we perhaps don't have the amount of intra-Africa trade that you spoke about in terms of increasing is because of a thinking within government corridors to do things as had been done in the past, and perhaps in a manner that is not relevant for the current time or for the future. What do you say to that? So maybe you can give us your take.
Yeah, I think that there is a lot that is happening. But maybe we are not always moving at the pace that is required. I think from a continental perspective, you have seen that there's already trade happening under the Continental Free Trade Area. So it's starting. I mean, it's starting slow, but we see that the ACFTA could be a game changer for the continent. But still, even the ACFTA to be effective, we will still need the infrastructure. I think all the speakers were talking about that, about the cost of trading within the continent. So even to make the ACFTA effective in the long run, we do have to have interoperability of standards of our communications, of our, for example, the rail networks in the continent. So we need to do more work on all of those areas, but also within our own sub-regions. In SADC, I think there are many areas where we are already enhancing this cooperation. But maybe one more point I would make from the sort of global G20 perspective. For the past 4 years, the G20 has put a lot of emphasis on making the multilateral development banks, including the ADB, to be more effective, to be better resourced, so that African countries can then start having a larger pool of borrowing. In fact, if you look at the ADB, in the past 5 years, we have seen its resources getting bigger and bigger. And therefore, this is one of the focus areas of our G20 presidency, to improve the development bank so that they can borrow more, bigger quantums to our countries to underpin the type of development that we seek, the type of development that is foreseen under the Agenda 2063 of the AU. So thank you. Let me stop here now. Thanks.
Okay, no, thank you also. Thanks for that intervention, Ambassador. We do have a gentleman two gentlemen who have raised their hand to make a comment. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Good morning. My name is Noah Dibela. I'm the president of MSME Chamber South Africa. My question is, how do we close the gap between the infrastructure spend and the industrial development policy position? Because what's currently happening is that we are spending money on infrastructure, but what we don't have the multiplier effect of that infrastructure spend in our local communities, where from a job creation point of view, we are importing everything from Asia and the rest of the world. We are not getting that multiplier effect from our spend. Thank you.
The multiplier effect is there if the full value that is allocated to infrastructure goes to infrastructure. That's the point I'm raising. If you see what Saki's organization did in Gauteng during 2010, the Gauteng Freeway Improvement Project and the Stadium Build Project, we even had the phrase, Philip is here. Why? It's because jobs were created. In fact, we had the global financial crisis of 2008. By 2009, our economy went into the negative. Growth was negative 1.5%. By 2010, it was plus 3%. Why? Because of the investment in infrastructure, and money was really going in the investment. What we experience at the moment is that if you allocate amounts to investment, not the full amount goes to building the bridge. Some of it leaks. That's why the multiplier effect is not there. As I said earlier, today, minus 1 trillion announced by government and 40 billion, we're spending 300 to 350 billion in infrastructure. Where is it?
Just okay. Let's take another question. We've got another comment that will also maybe provide further clarity. But yes, sir.
Good morning. My name is Tulan Ngumalo from ICA Coal. I think I'm not sure if we have a clear understanding of what investment is. Because when you do investments, you look at two things. You look at return, you look at risk, okay? And if your risk is high, you either don't invest there or you diversify. That's it. So it's not a coincidence that there's 2% of PPI of triple P projects. It's what it is, because we are doing everything to chase away capital. That's it. So until such time that we focus on the risk of investing, and understand those and basically have them. Because even when you go through this booklet, you know, it talks about investment, but then you look at the whole thing, there's no risk mentioned, you know. So I just want to understand, like, do we really understand what you're talking about, or we're just doing it because just to score some points there?
I will respond to say that everyone who talks too much about risk in Africa is being framed by Western media to think that Africa is a risky place. So that's the response I will give you, because everyone keeps telling us there is risk, that's why we are not investing. And I want actually to ask you to give me an example of an investment, any country in Africa that actually borrow money and fail to pay back because of the issue of the risk. So there is none, actually, if you compare to Asia or even to the Latin America. But I will leave it to my friend here to respond, because this is his book. Yeah. Now, before, maybe just one more thing, actually, about on industrial policy. I think there is one of the mistakes we've been actually making in Africa for a long time was to disconnect infrastructures and industrialization. And every time you see actually people talking about infrastructures, we don't necessarily, or in the past, we don't connect actually the infrastructures we are planning with how we can benefit from in terms of industrialization. Take corridors. We've been talking, one of the most famous and the hyped actually corridor in Africa right now is the Lopito-Maputo corridor. Everyone was talking about the corridor. And you see, when they talk about the corridor, is we're going to take actually minerals from DRC or move them, or from Zambia, and then move them actually to Lopito port and then export them. But there are two things that we're missing and that we have started addressing. Say again?
I have 2 minutes.
Yeah, two things missing.
Cool.
The first one which was missing is that in this corridor, no one actually was thinking about industrial development. And number two, which was missing, actually, no one was thinking about mobility. So those are the two things. Now, government of Angola came back and said, I want to rethink this corridor to make it more inclusive, more integrated, and bring back actually the question of the mobility and the question of industrialization. So now we start thinking more integrated. So I was posed here, you know.
But great example. Thanks for that. And definitely an opportunity to flesh it out again on another platform. This topic is still a long one. We're not going anywhere. But I'll give you the last word to settle the score on risk.
Yeah, no, thank you, Fifi, and thanks to everyone for being here. You know, this is the thing about being in public sector roles. People can practically insult you.
And tell you don't know what investment means. Thank you.
Yeah, we are investment professionals. I mean, we know what investments are. And risk is not an abstract thing. So the things we're talking about here is, you know, what are the financial risks for the project? Is it financeable? There's political risk, there's infrastructure, there's regulatory, there's. So what we're really trying to say is that if people want to get into these markets, what are the perceived risks and what it is that's being done about them? So that's why I started exactly there, that our role is confidence about the future, because that confidence to make the investment decisions is based on your perceived risk. Some may be real, some are quantifiable, and some are not. So we get into a room and say, these are the things that concern investors, and this is what we're doing about them. Thank you.
Thanks for that. And so thanks so much to you for tuning in as always, and hope to do this again with you in just a short while. Have a wonderful day further.